Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and again, right next to me, no one is here to help me focus, to help me remind me of the things I need to say, I need to ask. No chattering teacup, no CO. But here with me from across the pond, author Dakota Jackson. Hello, Dakota, and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I have to say, I really enjoyed your book, The Other Side of the Looking Glass. And first question is, of course, what can you tell our listeners about your book without giving too much away, of course?
Yeah, so The Other Side of the Looking Glass is a upper young adult contemporary novel following a 15-year-old girl named Naomi, who has a very abnormal home life with her birth mother deceased. Her birth father is neglectful, to say the least. Then her guardian, Matt, is very young and unconventional in many ways. So her life has never exactly been ordinary. She's always been longing for a sense of belonging, a sense of normalcy. So when she moves to a new town and finally makes some new friends and joins the drama club and starts to actually build a normal, quote unquote, life for herself, it's the first time she's ever experienced it, and she's in a very vulnerable place, which opens up the door for the trouble, which is when her new best friend Emmeline, her older brother Ren, who's 25, he showers Naomi in attention, in praise, in love, tells her that no one understands her the way that he does. And so Naomi falls into this very toxic, manipulative relationship with Ren because she feels like there is finally someone in her life who sees her life the way that she does and understands her anyway. And as she falls into this relationship alongside other hardships she's juggling in her personal and family life, she has to fight to keep the secret that he wants her to keep about the relationship before she not only loses him in this relationship and life she's built for herself, but her own sense of identity as well.
And I got the impression that her new friend Ren, let's just say her other friend George Washington, by the way, not in any way related to, he has a different take on Ren, hasn't he?
George, for sure, yeah. I wanted there at least to be one character who saw right through what Ren was trying to do. And I thought George was kind of the perfect character because he's her friend, but not her closest friend. He is her only other male friend that isn't family. And he has this personality that she constantly describes as quiet and shy. And she thinks that he does see a lot, quote unquote, but he won't speak about it. She's under this impression that even if he knows, it doesn't matter because he's not going to say anything. And in the end, maybe that's true, maybe it's not.
And Ren comes from this side of, his home life isn't also that sort of, good one and so on. And that's where he builds this connection with Naomi. And in a way, he has also a different relationship with his sister than the usual brother-sister relationship, doesn't he?
Right, yeah. So Ren and Emmeline, the Blackwells, their mother also died when they were younger, and their dad is a lawyer who goes on trips very often, more often than not, leaving Ren, who is much older than Emmeline, to kind of serve as the father figure in their house. So he comes from a similar place in the sense that he doesn't really have a solid set of parental figures. And at a young age, he had to become one for Emmeline. So he uses that to get close to Naomi, saying, we are the same. I know what you're going through. And then Emmeline is in this strange position as well, where she sees her brother as her father because he's been raising her for years and he's the one who's around and taking care of her, and they're very close. And then when she becomes friends with Naomi, there's all sorts of dynamics between the three of them that all three of them don't exactly know about each other.
I also found most intriguing the character of Matt, Naomi's guardian. He was also a very astonishing character insofar as he took charge, he took responsibility, although it wasn't his responsibility, so to speak.
Right.
So,
right, yeah.
Yeah, go on. Where did this come from, or where did this character come from for you?
Yeah, I have always been a very big fan of non-nuclear families in literature and media. And I have been very interested in the idea of younger guardians who are not forced into a position of being a guardian in the way that Ren was to Emmeline, but had chosen it even if they were unconventional, not only in the sense that they were younger, but in the sense that they were single and wanted to raise a kid alone, because that still is something that has stigma surrounding it. So Matt was originally, I kind of wanted the story to follow him. And then I decided, even with his past, even with his decision to take Naomi in, I thought he would serve better as a sort of mentor figure and guardian figure for her. So he was one of the most interesting characters to write, given his past and then his choices to raise her. But I really wanted to have that at the forefront, a single parent or guardian who chose to be there and who was happy to be there and makes that constant decision every single day to learn and grow and do better, even as he makes mistakes.
And Naomi's at an age where she also, as you put it in your book, in your novel, that she has to find her path, her way. At the age of 15, I mean, it's been a while since I was 15, but still, a bit a longer while. But it's hard. I mean, being a teenager is not that easy. It's even worse these days with all the, distraction of social media and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And finding her path between being a teenager, finding new friends, and finding a new way to describe her relationship with Matt and her biological father and his new wife as well. That's a lot she has to cope with. You put her quite in a pickle.
I did. I did, yeah. I kind of wanted to emphasize on that idea of when you are a teenager, you typically do go through a lot like that, where you're trying to find your path, you're trying to solidify your identity, and at the same time there are other outside forces that are hindering that in some way. And I kind of wanted to dramatize that, so there were major things hindering her, and from her perspective as a 15-year-old, how she would view and react to those things. Because I remember when I was 15, a lot of things, even if they were simple things, felt like life or death. Like my life was over. So I wanted to really capitalize off of that for her, especially because a lot of the things she's experiencing are very serious life-altering things.
And like you just said, when you're 15, everything is a big drama.
Exactly. Everything.
Everything. Later on you realize, oh, please.
Right. It's not that big of a deal.
No, but I mean, it's understandable. All your hormones are running wild and...
Right.
Yeah, I do understand. And I mean, it's not just Naomi. All of them, all of she and her friends, and you have this bitchy character, Carla. I mean, she really is a bitch, isn't she? I mean...
Yes, Carla. Yeah, she's sort of the stereotypical high school bully, kind of cast her in that role, especially in the lens of her being in the drama club with the rest of them. But I never intended for her to actually be like this absolutely terrible person. It's just that, she's 15 years old.
Yeah, but sometimes it turns out that people who behave like that as young adults or teenagers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, she absolutely does say and do terrible things. No excuses or anything for that. But yeah, she's not a major player, just an extra issue.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing Naomi, I think, is struggling with is also a teeny tiny bit, not the major part, is the fact that her father is of Japanese descent.
Right, yeah. So Jin, her birth father, is of Japanese descent, but because he gave her up when she was born after her mom died, and she was taken in by Matt, who was Jin's best friend in high school, she didn't get raised with that side, that culture, so she completely loses touch with it. And without him really constantly in her life, even when he comes back when she's like 15 and tries to build the relationship, she doesn't get back that part of it that she lost without him raising her. So she feels a disconnect in her own identity because he didn't raise her in that way.
Understandable. I suppose, I don't know. I suppose it would have been easier for her to cope with that if she had more connection with that part of her identity, do you think?
I'd like to think that it would have been helpful, at least in some way, because she would be a little more sure of herself. Like her identity would be less shaky to begin with, if she had that part of herself and that wasn't an added complication for her.
And where did you find, or where did you come by the idea for this whole book, for the characters, for the plot?
Yeah, so this was a weird book because most of the time there's like a one thing that sparks the rest of it for me. But I wrote this maybe a few years ago. The first draft in like a month straight, it like just all came out, and it was after I kept seeing on social media trends and stuff, and in a lot of TV shows and movies, like relationships like theirs portrayed as desirable, where it was like a much older man and a teenage girl, or even a much older woman and a teenage boy. And they were the end game relationship where you were supposed to root for them. And I just kept seeing them. And there was like a few weeks straight where it was on and on and on. And I was getting very frustrated in seeing that in the media and glamorizing it in a way that's very harmful to teenagers. So I wanted to write the other side of it. I wanted to flip it on its head and show that it is not something we should be teaching young kids that they want or that they should have to go through. So yeah, it was a little bit out of a place of anger, wanting to stop seeing that sort of representation and then to give another side so that hopefully we can build up on that in the media instead, in showing that it's not okay. There are ways through it if you have lived through it.
Yeah, it's an imbalance of power, isn't there? I mean, Ren is not a teacher or anything else, but he's still older and he has all the power in this relationship. Especially he was, let's put it that way, he was sniffing out the fact that, as you put it, Naomi was or is in this vulnerable position when they meet.
Right. And a lot of the time with manipulative people who get into relationships like that, they do sort of sniff out their prey in that sense. There's a pretty common thread of how they find and go for their quote unquote prey. So Naomi unfortunately falls into that role, but Ren does it in a way that she doesn't realize at first until she's in a little too deep.
Yeah, but Matt has also the ability to recognize let's call it, be honest, and let's call it predator-like personality. Which is astonishing. But when we move on in your novel, I don't want to give it away, we find out why he has this uncanny ability to recognize this part of Ren.
Yes, Matt, he's very aware, but at the same time, he, as her guardian who is young, and he has trouble referring to himself as her father because he feels like he doesn't want to steal that role from Jin. And he makes Naomi call him Matt. And they're like in this weird where he's raised her and always been there for her. But there's a disconnect in calling each other family and just like being so open about that. So even though he clocks a lot of things very quickly and has his suspicions or assumptions, he's very reluctant to act on them or speak about them because he either feels that he doesn't have the place or that he's making a big deal out of it because of his own personal past or stepping on Jin's toes or something of that sort. So he is in this very strange space, much the same as Naomi, where he's shaky in the foundations of who he is, especially to her.
Now that you mention it, it reminded me a little bit of the TV show The Fosters, to be honest.
Yes, I loved that show growing up.
Yes, but in this show, it was completely clear what is going on. You have these foster parents, and there is no question about who they are, who the children are, what is going on. And like you said, Matt is very, very reluctant to take this position from his best friend. On the other hand, he's a bit resentful, I suppose. Would I be correct to call him a teeny tiny bit resentful?
I think that's definitely fair to say, maybe even a little more than a teeny tiny bit. Yeah, he definitely holds a lot of resentment against Jin. Matt is very open about saying that Jin abandoned Naomi. And even though he feels that way and he's very angry at him, he still loves Jin as the best friend he's had since childhood. So they have a very family-like dynamic, almost like brothers, where he loves him unconditionally, but he's held a grudge for 15 years straight. at Jin for leaving and then not coming back until her life was already kind of in shambles.
And you said before that Matt was one of the characters you enjoyed writing the most. Oh, one of the characters you enjoyed writing the most. Which character did you find most hard or the hardest to write?
Ren, for sure, was the hardest. It was very difficult to do to write his role realistically, because as a predator towards Naomi, who was writing from the first person, it needed to make sense that she fell for his trap. People who are predatory like that, a lot of the time, they have qualities that make them likable at first. So in particular, Ren, he's very personable. He's very friendly. He was very kind to her, she thought.
Would you even say that he has a sort of charismatic personality?
Oh, yeah. Charismatic, that's a great word for him. Yeah. So she very easily fell for that. And then writing kind of the downward spiral from there, where she still saw that side of him, but then the other side was coming out, where he would tell her to keep secrets or snap at her to do this or that, or push her to do things that she wasn't ready for. So trying to do that at the same time that Naomi was still feeling like, oh, I love him, he's the only one who understands me, is there for me. That was very hard to do authentically.
Understandable. I mean, if you're a young adult and read this story, it takes, I think it would take you quite some time to realize what kind of person Ren is. I when I started reading the book, my first impression was, I have to admit, oh, what a creep.
Yeah.
But you did a fantastic job, and at the end, how everything comes together, and also she still has these doubts about, is he really that sort of person, or is he not? I mean, understandable. She's 15.
Right. Yeah. Even kind of as it all implodes, Naomi's still thinking that they could end up together. That it's not that bad. Because, she's 15, and this is her first experience in that sense. And her family is still so rocky that she's clinging to anything that will make her feel better, even if it's only for a little while.
Yeah. And you mentioned TV shows or books that put this kind of relationship in a positive way, or want the audience to watch it in a positive way. And in reality, I mean, here in Austria, we had this case of she was a teacher. I mean, she was in her early 40s, and her student was 14 when they had started their relationship. And he was not yet 14, because if he had been 14, it would have been permitted to have this relationship. And they couldn't wait, obviously, until he was 14. And then she had a child. They were together for a short while after. And now they are no longer together. But still, it always made me think, I mean, seriously, 14 or not even 14? Ugh. Yeah, come on.
God. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, a few years ago, similar thing in the high school I went to, actually, there was an instance of a teacher who was exposed for having many relationships with boys in his classes, and that was an added fuel to my fire, I guess, as I was trying to write this, especially because it was so close to home. Like, it was a teacher that I did know and have.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially if a male teacher and young boys who finding their way as a gay teenager, it's even double hard.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And exploring or I don't know, being that kind of predator and taking advantage of their doubts and of their fears and like that. This is despicable.
Exactly. Yeah. But they're trying to figure out that side of themselves, and you're manipulating that. That's an added just
yeah. Aside from the yuck.
Right.
So and the whole book is written from the first person perspective. Was it intended that way from the beginning, or did you change that, or did it just happen?
It just sort of happened. The very first line I wrote was the opening line in the book, which was in the first person point of view. And then I didn't feel like it would hold the same sort of strength if I changed it to the third person. So then I just wrote the rest of the story in the first person from there, which in this case, I think really worked. A lot of the time I tend to go for third person as a writer, but in this case, just being inside of Naomi's head, and getting across the way that she was perceiving things, I felt like it was really important to be directly from her first person perspective.
It's definitely more intimate for the reader as
Right.
well. Yeah.
Right.
And you will constantly want to say, no, please don't.
I know. Even writing it, I wanted to say that. Yeah.
You wanted to say that. Did Naomi also say, oh, come on, Dakota? You can do that?
In the back of her head, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I do understand that where they take their own life. I mean, they're developing their own voice in your head even, don't they?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. I know what you mean. No question there. The other characters, like we said, the bitchy one and the friend George, who sees more than he lets on that he sees. But also we have her first time best girlfriend. That's also new for Naomi. She's also an interesting character. On the one hand, she seems to be quite open. And yet at the same time, as we discover, there's also something that's in part of her personality that feels not safe to share until rather late in the book.
Right. Yeah. So for writing Emmeline, I kind of wanted her to, at the same time, she contrasted Naomi in all of their outward appearances and personalities on the inside to be a lot more similar than either of them realize. So Naomi, she's very withdrawn and reserved and quiet. And then Emmeline, from right when you meet her, she is cheerful. She is bright. She's kind of always talking. She wants to be friends right away. She's pretty open, it seems, about her home life and how she's doing and what she desires from life. And then the more Naomi gets to know her, the more she realizes she doesn't know all that much about her at all, because Emmeline is holding a lot close to her chest and feeling like she can't explore it safely or share it safely. Very similar to Naomi. So at their core, they're going through a lot of the same stuff. They're just not talking to each other about it.
Hide behind a nice and cheerful mask. Is that something teenagers do a lot? I mean, we adults know how to put up a mask. It's easier sometimes for us. We play roles. Right.
Yeah, I think it's probably more common in adults to play that sort of role. A lot of younger kids, teenagers, I feel like more often it is the mask of anger rather than the mask of tearfulness, which Naomi isn't all that angry of a person, but she's a little more, I guess, gloomy outwardly. And I think that's her mask. So I wanted Emmeline to be the opposite of that, and have her be very bright and cheerful, even if she doesn't realize that she's doing it to play a role and to hide something.
Do you think that, we touched a little bit upon it at the beginning, that being a teenager these days is probably even harder than it was, let's say, for someone like me, Gen X in the 80s?
I think they, obviously all come with their own difficulties, but with the prominence of social media in particular, I feel like that's got to be a lot harder in a lot of ways. Like with cyberbullying and just like the expectations and trends being set through social media or just in the media industry itself, like in movies and TV shows, like we talked about, having all of that on top of all of the other normal problems that teenagers go through. Sometimes it feels like I don't even know how they do it.
There's also the question of the important roles of the adults in a teenager's life. I mean, what I've found questionable, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I still do think it's questionable when parents or adults pretend to be their children's friends. You're not the friends. You are the parents, the guardians. You are the adult in the room, or you should be the adult in the room.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you don't want to set the expectation with your children or who you're taking care of that you're just friends, because then you're blurring that line and boundary. And I think that is kind of something a little bit with Matt and Naomi, where that line is very blurred, and that's why they're so confused with each other.
It's for him, I suppose. It's also quite hard, like you just said. I mean, who am I? She's questioning herself or her position or her part in his life. And who am I to you? Who am I to anyone?
Right.
And I suppose, although we do not hear his thoughts because, like we said, it's first person, it's also something he is questioning continuously. Who am I to you? Who am I there to be to you, even?
Yeah, exactly. And he, that's like years and years and years of him feeling like that ever since he took her in. He's been on that line of not really knowing where he stands to her, where he stands with Jin. So just constantly year after year, he hasn't figured it out or grown out of it. He's like stuck in a box. I'm not sure where to go.
And do you also think that in recent years, maybe, I'm speaking from the adult point of view, I'm not a parent myself, but I'm a teacher dealing with teenagers. And what I observe or have observed over the last, let's say, few years is this me culture. Me. What is it? What happened? Is it healthy? I don't think it is healthy.
No, yeah, I don't think so either. Being so stuck inside yourself, focused on yourself, really makes it hard to build natural, healthy relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And even with yourself, if you're so focused, me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about me and what everybody else, who cares?
Right.
Yeah. And your writing, when did it happen? I mean, it just falls from the sky. This constant need to write down what's going on in your head. Characters pop up, ideas pop up, and then you just feel the need to put them on paper. Otherwise, you have sleepless nights.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of been there within me like all my life. I remember trying to write my first book when I was like 9. It was a terrible story about gremlins. I can't remember anything else about it now. But that was the first one I tried to write, maybe got 100 pages in and then gave up on it and kept doing the same thing over and over and over until finally, when I was like 18 or 19, I decided to sit down and try it for real again. Because the like nagging in the back of my head with ideas and with, hey, you could still do this, you can still be a writer. It finally clicked and I decided to be serious about it. So then I just decided I'd listen to all those random voices giving me dialogue in my head and do something with them.
Yeah. Then you had your manuscript done. And did you decide, okay, I'm sending it off to publishers? And how did that work out for you? You're fairly young. It was the beginning of your career.
Yeah. This book was the second one I wrote. So I wrote a completely different one before it that I rewrote maybe 10 times before I decided I've had enough of this one. I need a break. So I wrote this one instead. I wrote it, I think I mentioned, in like a month. It all just came out. Go was the first draft. And then I left it alone for a few months before returning, reading it over, kind of self-editing, so revising the whole thing, gutting it and starting new. And then at that point, I was like, what the heck? Let's try sending it out. So I found a few publishers who were accepting submissions without a query letter, which that's always been my most difficult part, is query letters. I never know how best to write them. So that was like so appealing to me that someone would want to just read the first few pages without the query letter. So I went ahead and forwarded to places like that. And then April Publications, the indie publisher that I went through for this book, they were one of those ones where they weren't asking for a query. They just wanted to see the full manuscript. So I just sent it in, and maybe a month and a half later, I heard back, and they wanted to hop on a call and talk more about me, talk more about the book and its purpose and what I wanted from it. And I signed with them about a month after that.
Oh, good for you. And well, congratulations. And it's always great to hear and read indie authors, because you are the ones who never pop up in the search algorithm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unfortunately, because there's so much good stuff out there. Sometimes even better than what comes out of traditionally published, avenues.
Yeah, that was part of the struggle with signing with an indie publisher, was that I knew that it wasn't going to be mainstream and that it would be a lot harder to find my audience and market and promote it But there's a level of intimacy to indie publishers that you just can't get with traditional publishers that I really enjoyed, especially for a first experience, getting to be so involved in some of the processes that I didn't fully understand. It meant a lot to me for this first book and for my debut to get it out there and have had my hands on it every step of the way.
Understandable. And would you say that's something you are going to stuck with or stay with, not stuck with, stay with, because it offers you so much more freedom and being involved in the whole process, unlike with a traditional publisher?
Yeah, so I'm still very interested in pursuing traditional publishing, at least in some way with at least one of my many drafted manuscripts. But I'm definitely inclined to continue working with indie publishers should I have the opportunity to, so that I can continue having that level of agency in my own writing and publication. That meant a lot to me, being able to make those final decisions. But I wouldn't turn down some extra marketing and promotion help. That's for sure.
Also quite understandable. Although hearing it from traditionally published authors, they also say it has changed quite a lot also in this part, where you have to do a lot of promotion yourself.
Yeah, I've been hearing that recently, which has been helping to solidify my idea of sticking indie.
Yeah, I can understand that. And do you have a genre which you would absolutely love to try your hands on?
So, yes, normally I write in contemporary or like upmarket literary styles. Recently, I have been working on some young adult fantasy and trying my hand at some very epic genre world building. I'd really like to get better in that realm, in the fantasy or magical realism, maybe even horror realms. I've always been a huge fan of horror. It's just writing it was a lot harder than I expected. After consuming a ton of horror, I was like, I can do this, and then I could not do it. So I would really love to try my hand at that again someday, but maybe once I work through fantasy first.
What is the part that keeps you from trying it? You said it's hard. It's harder than you imagined. What is the hard part?
Yeah, it's for horror in particular. It's actually making it scary. Like building the suspense to the point where it's actually horror. I've kind of always struggled, even when reading some horror, to really pick up on how they did it and made it fit the genre perfectly. So I think maybe I just need to read more horror and then try again until I work out what exactly it is that's fallen flat the few times I've tried. Probably pacing and building of suspense, but yeah, setting that tone is what I've with.
Do you think, or do you agree that in young adult fiction there is far more playing with new ideas, different ideas, than it is in adult fiction?
I do think in many ways, young adult fiction has a wider breadth of ideas and themes than adults. And I'm not exactly sure why that would be. Maybe it's just in young adult fiction, there's the very common idea of coming of age or in finding yourself. That's not as common in adult. And with both of those ideas, there are so many different avenues and paths that characters and storylines can take that they just had the ability to hone in on a lot more diverse things, I guess, than adult in general.
And maybe young adults are more open to new ideas?
Yeah, I think even in the industry, selling certain topics or characters or themes is easier if you market it as young adult than it is as adult. I know for like fantasy in particular, they do a lot better marketed as young adult than adult, even if they are, just because those ideas and topics are seen as less mature, less adult, something of that sort. So putting them in young adult gives them more opportunity in some way.
And you said world building. Is that something you've always enjoyed, or think that's something you would you would enjoy absolutely, because I would think that's even harder than writing horror, building complete worlds, and I don't know, coming up with different kinds of, I don't know, species or languages, and you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's always intrigued me. I've always really wanted to build my own complex world with all of those things. It is very, very difficult. A lot of the time, as I've been trying to work on this young adult fantasy, it's been harder than writing itself to come up with these world building facts.
Yeah.
Even like the simplest of things, like certain language they do or don't use, has been a lot more tricky and taken a lot more thought and planning than I initially expected. But I found it to be rewarding in many ways, because once I get one little world building fact, the rest just kind of builds around it. And it helps my creativity to have to think and come up with these things and reasonings as to why these things exist. So I think it's really made me a better writer, which that's important to me. So I like doing things like that.
Mm-hmm. Now that you mention it, you have to plan a lot. So are you the proverbial stickler to plans, or you know?
Not really. I have a tendency to, when I try to buy books, I read the first and last sentences before I decide if I'm going to buy them. So I do the same exact thing when I write. I'll write the first sentence, I'll write the last sentence, and then I have to figure out how to fill all of the places in between.
Okay.
So I tend to come up with characters first. I'm very character driven, and then build the storyline around them. A lot of the time, my outlines are just characters, one or two major plot points, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write now. So not really much of a stickler for planning. I tend to write outlines as I'm already writing the book.
Okay. I get it. Yeah, I get it. I do get it. And what about the editing process? Because some of the authors, especially the independent ones, say, yeah, at one point, you have to let it go.
That's the hardest part for me. Because now my book has been out for 6 months or so, and I keep feeling like I really wish I could take it back and redo this part or rewrite this sentence, or even just adjust one specific word choice. I always feel like it's never going to be perfect, and that's such a struggle with the editing process. I have some stories I've rewritten like a dozen times, and I probably will write a dozen times more before I think that they're good to go. And then, like with this one, even after it's out, I'm still like, ugh, I really wish I could redo it.
Yeah, I think that's something all the authors struggle with when they come.
Yes.
But it's a good thing that what you said before, that you wrote the manuscript and then you let it sit for a while, and then you come back and take another look.
Yeah, I like to look at it with what I call a pair of fresh eyes. So after I've let it sit for long enough that all the little details have kind of left my mind, I can't remember exact things, then I'll go back and read it. And then I catch, any plot holes, any even silly grammar mistakes, major plot holes, things of that sort that on the first time around I just wouldn't have caught, being so deep invested in it at the time.
And do you have any beta readers, or are you part of a writing community which helps you with your struggles writing?
So currently I am getting my MFA at Southern New Hampshire University. So I've had a lot of workshops in classes there where we share scenes and bits of our writing, not always full manuscripts, but small things at a time. And then everyone in the class will leave comments all over it. So it is very similar to having beta readers. It's just a little more personal and constructive in the sense that very specific things are focused on in each workshop. So one will be on voice, one will be on character, one will be on setting, things of that sort. So then we're honing in on each individual aspect of the craft to build from there. So even if I didn't do it with this book in particular, doing it with other pieces of my writing has helped me catch recurring problems that I could then take everywhere else.
And during the writing process, when you write your books, do you find it easy to write, for example, dialogue? Or is it easier for you to write descriptions, or can you enjoy both because they both feel quite easy for you?
I do enjoy both, but I think dialogue in particular is easier for me. A lot of the time, dialogue comes first for me. Like when I get ideas for characters or books, it will be some random dialogue of characters I don't quite know yet going on in my head. And then I take those and put them to page. When it comes to exposition and descriptions, I struggle a little more there because I tend to have more of an internal monologue voice where sometimes it just goes on and on and on and on. And then I have to read it back and be like, why am I rambling? Cut all of it and then just give you a brief description of this is where they are. This is what it smells like. This is what it feels like. So remembering to hit those 5 sensory details is where I struggle a lot with description. Especially setting in particular. I tend to white wall syndrome my characters where they're just stuck in this blank room and no one has any idea why. And then the dialogue is so real, it feels great, but it doesn't work with the setting. So it's a little strange mix of trying to get both together.
But do you also see, I mean, this might sound like a strange question, but do you also see when you hear the dialogue in your head, do you also see sort of the people in your head, like a short sequence of a film?
Not as much. A lot of the time it's like disembodied dialogue. Sometimes I see very clearly what I want the characters or the scene to look like. And in those cases, it's a lot easier to then turn it into a full scene with the setting and everything. But a lot of the time that is the part that's lacking when I'm thinking of it in my head is the actual visual detail.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, understandable. Yeah, I'm just wondering because it's something that often happens to me. I see a sort of,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wish, yeah.
I mean, scenes, like you said, they're scenes. And then it is easier to write them down because when you know what you see, so to speak.
Right.
But sometimes it can be hard for the reader because you know what you see and you know what you know.
Exactly.
But for the reader, then grasping your thoughts or what you want to transport is sometimes not so easy.
Exactly, yeah. Translating all of what I see very vividly in my head to words on a paper for the reader to see the same way that's the hardest part.
Yeah, exactly. That's where the advice comes in, no?
Right.
Absolutely. And Dakota, what would be your advice then for any other author or upcoming author, indie author out there?
Yeah, so there's this quote, I think it's by Stephen King, that to be a better writer, the one thing you need to do is read a lot. So my first advice is always that. If you're struggling in writing to your genre or to your audience, or even just in how to do the simpler things like, build a character, dialogue, tension, I really do think that your best way of learning is from others. So by reading a lot, you can begin to pick up on the common thread between all of those published works, especially, in the traditional ones, you can see why they're getting picked up and what's working, even if you also notice what's not working, and you can learn from both of those things and then take that into your writing and just write a lot and then leave it for a while, go back, see what you did right or wrong, build from there, and just keep the process going on and on and on. And just, it might be cliche, but don't give up. There's someone out there who's going to want your story, who's going to want your writing, and you just have to keep honing it until you get there.
Absolute sage advice. I absolutely agree. Read. Absolutely. Do you think, because that's something I heard recently on a podcast, on a history podcast, where the guest said there has been more interest in ancient myths for books. Is that something you have also observed?
A little bit. Now that I'm thinking about it, even on like social media, especially like Book Talk or the writer side of Twitter, things of that sort, I've been seeing more mythologically based concepts in recent days. I didn't really think about it until I mentioned it now, but I have been seeing that a lot more commonly, which would be interesting to tap into as I'm attempting to write fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree, because there's a lot you can get from those. Yeah, absolutely. And Dakota, what are the plans? What can we look forward to from you? Can you a little bit elaborate on what's coming next? Because we want to read your next one.
Yeah, so I am working on a couple things at the moment. As mentioned, I'm writing young adult fantasy, which I am going through with an editor and a couple beta readers at the moment, so I'm going to be submitting that very soon to see if it will go anywhere. And then I am also working on a new adult upmarket story, which is what I'm using as my thesis for my MFA program. So it is fully written. This is the one that I've written maybe a dozen times. The first book I ever wrote. Finally gotten it through the process, through an advisor, beta readers, a couple editors. So I'm feeling like very, very soon that one will be polished as much as I can accept it being polished. And then I will begin submitting that one as well. So it's just a matter of figuring out which of those two is actually next and ready. But both of them are in the works.
And that also makes me ask you one more question regarding what's coming up, because I often wonder, is there anything you would never write?
Yes. Westerns are probably the one thing I would never write. I've never even really read a full Western, so like that alone, I don't think I could do in writing. It's just never been my cup of tea.
Okay.
So that's the only one that comes to mind. Oh, maybe sci-fi. I'm not a very big sci-fi person. I've read a few, but they just never really resonate with me in the same way that other stories do. So I feel like if I tried to write it, I just would not do justice to the genre.
Okay. So you are also not a sci-fi nerd regarding TV shows?
No.
Okay.
No, not really.
Okay. Yeah, well, why not?
Teach your own, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do enjoy sci-fi as well. I also enjoy Western. I had a few guests on the show who wrote Westerns, and I really enjoyed them. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, they've never really been my thing. Maybe I need to give it another shot. But
yeah, I mean, give it a try or not. I mean, it's interesting that you said that some people say, oh, that's, I don't know. I would never dare write a crime fiction novel. I'm hopeless. I can never work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of feel that way about mysteries. I get so wrapped up in them that I don't know if I could really do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, no idea. I enjoyed them tremendously. I'm a huge fan of crime fiction. Don't get me wrong, but like I said,
how they do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't do it. Dakota, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
I don't think so. No, that's all that comes to mind. You've asked me all the good questions.
And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
Yes, I absolutely did. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for making time for me and doing this. It was an absolute pleasure. Please don't go away. I will join you in the green room shortly.
Sounds good.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.